Hello, YouTube. Today I'm going to be discussing the Buescher C Melody saxophone. I have four examples in front of me, ranging from 1923 all the way to 1929. Uh, Now, I will discuss a little bit about some of the horns that were before this, but unfortunately, I don't have any examples in my collection. But I will do a fairly in depth uh, discussion about some of the similarities and differences between these different horns. Okay, so one of the first things I wanted to talk about was the cases on these horns. Now, the earlier horns, this is a kind of later made in the year 1923, this particular one. Now, about mid-year or so, these cases switched to this design. Before that, they would have been, well, the actual construction of the box was different. From this point onward, they had a fairly deep bottom, and the top is considerably thinner. So the ratio is kind of like a 2-to-1, roughly, ratio between the top and bottom. The earlier ones were 1-and-1, so the top and bottom were pretty much even thickness. The band went right around the middle, and the earlier ones did not have pretty much any padding. Uh, they had these clamps, much like this design right here, where it's like a hard wood block, and it clamps the horn in. And there would be another one located in the middle that would grab this loop. And then, as well as at the bottom where the bow guard is, you would have another clamp right in that area. So that was how the older ones. And then before that, they even had the cases that were kind of contoured. You would see a lot of those, your 1918, 19, maybe 1920, some of the earlier versions of these. So that would be that. Those horns, the earlier horns, earlier than this, there's points in time. The further back you go, the worse the intonation gets. The cases were not designed as well. Just overall, the horns were not as well designed and built at that time. You start getting into the early 20s, 1921, 22, 23, they start to improve a good bit. And 1923, roughly, is when you had a peak in the production of these things. So there was definitely a lot of these made in this time. You see a lot of them 22, 23, 24 that come up for sale and so on. So that is the design for this one. After that, after this point, around 1924 or so, they started using this design for the case. This design is, at least in my opinion, for these old wood cases that these came in from the factory, these are much better cases than the earlier ones. For one, you've got padding all the way up the bottom of the horn, and along the back here, you've got a padded top, padded front around the bell, which this one does have all of those things, but we've got this wood block at the end. That's kind of the major difference between this and this. Um, Now, this one you can see is padded down here. So it's just less of a chance. When you have something like this with this hardwood block, if the horn happened to drop, even probably from a low height, and hit this end of the case, since this is rigidly attached to the case, there's a good chance you could either bend something up here, you could potentially spread the receiver a little bit, or even bend the body. Obviously, any horn dropped could sustain some kind of damage, but it's much less likely when you have more padding like this. And these horns, when the cases are in good condition, they actually fit pretty tight in here. They're not too loose and sloppy. If it's a case that's been around the block a lot, there's a good chance that you will have some room in here. It'll slop around, and you'll have space around all this padding. A lot of it gets compressed. Also, if it's been stored on its feet on the back, so like if the case is in the vertical position like this, standing up for decades in a closet somewhere, it'll end up compressing this back edge of padding. And when that compresses, now the whole horn can shift front to back like this. I don't have a Buescher, I do have a Con that did happen to. And unfortunately now it fits very loose in the case. So I do my best to always store them in this flat position. That's just my personal preference. I found works best for me. So all the cases from this point onward pretty much are the same. Now this 29 does have a little bit of a difference here. This one has a wood block along the back edge here, and it does have some padding, but the padding is thinner. I don't know if they did that to make it so that this padding can't compress down as much as the earlier cases that just had, big thick layer of padding back here. I don't know if that's what the idea was, but that is a change. This one also has a longer box. The older ones, I don't know if you can really see it, but yeah, you can kind of see it. See how much closer to the bell the box is here versus this one. Excuse me. That's a change that happened in these really late ones. This is a 1929, so this is getting pretty late for a C melody. But anyway, yeah, most of these cases from around 24 on up are the same for the most part. It's the earlier ones that you got to watch for. If they're in good condition, regardless of what type you have, they'll probably be, I wouldn't gig with the thing, but if you just have it around the house and you want to just, play it casually or whatever, there's nothing wrong with these cases. I kind of like having the original case, especially when they're nice and clean like this, because it just looks period and correct for the horn. So now I'll talk about the little badge on the top. This one has 2 rivets. They switched over to 4 rivets later on, probably because these edges get caught and pulled up, and you can easily fold this over, and then it'll have a sharp piece of brass sticking out and can cut you. That didn't exactly happen with this, but the edges did lift, and occasionally I do get caught on this. So it's not as nice of a design. Now, pay close attention to the negative space inside of the B, as well as how this little tail that comes out from the R and goes all the way under to the left here. See how that goes all the way right up to the edge? Well, this is a Series 2. That's how the Series 2s looked. Now, this horn is a Series 3. You'll find some Series 2s that look like this as well, but Series 2s and Series 3s you will find with this style. Font, you can see that the little tail goes all the way back under to the edge, and the B looks pretty much the same as this one. Now, when we go to the Series 4s, we have a difference. We have a big gap here. It's no longer touching, and the letters are a lot thicker. And the B, you can see how small the negative space inside the B is. And that's the same case with this one. Got that really small negative space, and the tail doesn't go all the way to the edge. So that's a little change that happened along the way with the badges on the top of the cases. So now we'll get into the actual horns. One last thing though, before I get to the horns, I want to talk a little bit about the necks. Now, these necks on these horns are pretty much all the same neck. They didn't really change much. But in the earlier ones, you'll see some necks where this pip is actually much higher up. It's probably almost close to where the support is, and then the support would be further up here. So the early ones that have that with the octave pip up here, they have the intonation is not as good on those. You have some issues at the top end. It's just not a good design for the necks. So if you're looking for one of these horns and you're just shopping around, try to find one that has the neck that you can see how the pip is kind of positioned right where this straight portion is here, right as it starts to go around that bend is where the pip is, and that's the better necks on these. If the pip is kind of up here, it's not so good. Now, the tenors for the true tones did have their pip kind of up here, but that was for the tenor saxes. It was different. But for a C melody, the better ones will be in this location. So, now that that's out of the way, this horn is a Series 2. Now, this does look a little different than some Series 2s because this has the gold-plated finish. But, try to ignore the finish discrepancies between this and some of the other horns. We're just going to be looking at the actual function, the keywork, other designs on the horn. So this is a Series 2. This horn here is a Series 3. We have a Series 4. And we also have another Series 4. Excuse me. Okay, so now we're going to take a closer up look at these horns. We got the 4 here. So this is a 1923 gold plate Series 2. We have a silver-plated 1925 Series 3. We have a silver-plated 1927 Series 4. And a silver-plated 1929 Series 4. So, one thing, if you were to take all of the keys off of these horns, so, you're not going to know whether it has a front F or it doesn't, or if it has the pearl G sharp, or if it has the one with the little roller on it. If you took all that stuff off, there's actually 2 different types of body tubes here. We have these two, the Series 2 and the Series 3, that share a body, and the Series 4s. Those are a different body design. I like to refer to these as body tube type A and body tube type B. Now, there's a lot of reasons why I separated the two, but one of the easiest ways to determine whether you have a type A or a type B body is based on what type of chromatic F sharp you have. So for this horn, you can see the chromatic F sharp is the style. This is how most of the older true tone C melodies were. It wraps around the back and it has a key guard over top of the thumb rest. You can see the same thing on this Series 3 horn. We have the same design. Now, that's the type A bodies. The type B body, notice there's nothing above the thumb rest here. Same on this one, nothing above the thumb rest. Now, our chromatic F sharp is this rocker kind of, not rocker, sugar spoon shaped key. So that was a modification that was done when they switched over to the newer design body tube for the Series 4s. That's probably the easiest way I find to determine which type you have. That can help clear up confusion between the Series 4 and the Series 3, because when you look at a Series 3, a lot of people will see it and think it's a Series 4 because it has the front F key, as well as it has the 4-roller pinky spatula here. And even has the little pants guard or whatever, anti-bump guard over the B key that the Series 4s have. So it's easy to think right away, oh, it's a Series 4. Not really. This is actually nothing more than a Series 2 body with, I guess if you will, Series 4-ish keys on them. So, knowing the body tube types can help you decipher whether you have a Series 3 or if you have an actual Series 4 instrument. The Series 4, we also have the front F, and we also have the 4-roller pinky spatula and the guard here. So you can see how it can be confusing. So that is the different types of body tubes. Now, starting at the bottom, I'm going to show you some things that are actually similar between the Series 2 and the Series 3 versus the Series 4. One thing, if you look at this right-hand pinky cluster here, these set of keys, the spacing between this joint and the bottom of this key, I can kind of just fit my index finger between here. See that? The same goes for the Series 3. I can just fit my index finger between there. These are part of the same type A body. Now the type B bodies, the series 4s, if I put my index finger there, wow, look how much more space is below that. So these are actually, these are lengthened, these tubes here, these hinge rods, and we now have the pinky spatula here sits a little bit higher, around 3/8 to a half an inch higher than on the type A bodies. So that is one thing that changed on the different body tubes. Now, but it remained the same between the Series 2 and the Series 3. Another thing, the side keys. On the Series 2s and the Series 3s, the Type A bodies, we have this type of side key arrangement. Now you can see that the side C is rather short, and we kind of have this strange way that this has this right angle bend in the key arm that sticks out. It's not the most efficient design in the world, but that was what they did for the Type A bodies, your Series 2, and you can see it here on the Series 3. When we go to the Type B body, the Series 4, we can see these are now different. We have a longer side C key. It just has a smoother appearance and feel to it. It doesn't have that awkward key arm sticking out the side. And another thing about these, if you look at this post stays in the same position on all of these horns, whether it's an A body or a B body. So you got this post here for the bis key. That's actually the lowest post for the upper stack rod. That's where it threads in. So that post is the same. And you can kind of see it relative to the tone hole. You know, it kind of is in line with the top of the F sharp tone hole. Same here. It's kind of right in line with that. But if you look at the post that holds part of the side keys on, look at the gap between this post and this post. That's the A body. This also has the A body. And then look at the B body. Look how close these are. On the B bodies, they actually shift up. Once again, the side keys are shifted up around 3/8 to a half of an inch. So, same thing. Pretty much everything on here, on the newer body tubes, they shifted it up a little bit. I'm not sure why that was. I'm sure maybe it had something to do with ergonomics. I don't know. I'm sure every person that plays, everyone has slightly different length arms and different size hands, and it's going to feel different to everybody. But I guess whoever the people were designing these at the time felt that those keys needed to be moved upward a little bit. So that takes care of that. And now we'll look at the bottom stack. The bottom stack on these, the Type A bodies, have this little tab that sticks out of the keys. The Series 2s and the Series 3 has it right here. That sticks out of the E key pad cup. And the D kind of just rests on top of it with some adjustment material right there. That's how that makes that connection. You can see it here is the same way. Now, when we go to the Type B bodies, we have a little bit of a different arrangement here. There's no longer a tab soldered on to the pad cup for the E key. We now have, these kind of have both shifted upward a little bit again. And the low D here has a key arm that actually goes all the way down to the hinge tube. So the hinge tube on these is where the energy transfers from here down to the hinge tube and then back up to the key here. Now, one good thing about that is you're not putting a twisting or torsional type of force against this key, trying to twist it and rock it this way, like on the older ones that had the pearl on, actually soldered onto this part of the key, the pad cup. So this is a little bit different design. These are much closer together. I find it to be a little bit nicer to get around on. I can move quicker on it, having my fingers closer. But that was a difference. I mean, the positioning of the pearls was a little different too. You can see this one, the Type B body, they look like this, but on the Type A body, it kind of hangs out a little bit more. So there's some differences there. And one last thing on the bottom stack before we go to the top end of the horn is the junction point here, the connection between the bis, the G sharp, and the F sharp bottom stack. On the older type A bodies, they just have this skinny little arm, and there's not much room for adjustment material there. And that's just how they were on these. Most of the older Buescher C melodies were like that. This one, being the Series 3, it looks like they kind of changed the underside of it, maybe gave it a curved profile for whatever reason, but it's essentially the same thing. We've got this long, skinny key arm that comes out, and that's it. You know, there's not much room for adjustment material. And unfortunately, being so thin, it can compress rather easily, and sometimes getting just the right material selection for there can be difficult, and keeping it in adjustment for a long time can be difficult, depending on how strong your spring tensions and all that are. Now, going to the type B bodies, you can see we now have this swivel. I'll get you a little bit of a view of it this way. So that key, actually, you can see the swivel action going on there. And what that does is that gives you a much wider surface area for that adjustment material. So there's a steel rod that goes through here, small little hinge rod, and that pivots on there. So you gotta make sure you keep that oiled. But it does provide a much smoother transition and gives you a much more stable platform to put your adjustment material on for that. And you can see it on here as well. So that's another way you can easily spot whether you've got a type B body or a type A. Type A's don't have the swivel, and type B's do have the swivel. So moving up to the top portion of the horn, we can take a look. I guess at first we'll look at these side keys here. Now this is the type A body, Series 2, and we've got this kind of curved arm that comes out for your side C. You'll see the same thing on the Series 3 this is also a type A body, same type of design. Now for the Series 4s with the type B body, now we have a different design. This comes straight out here, and this post was actually moved up a little bit. There's a lot of post movement in the top stack on these, going from the series, or from the A bodies to the B bodies. You can see here 1929 has it as well. So that's one thing that changed. Now if we go to the actual top stack, the top stack pearl arrangement, you can see here we've got this relatively kind of like a V form to it, and this little tiny bis key, little bis pearl. The B key has the pearl pretty much hanging right off the edge of it there, off the pad cup. The A key, the arm, has a right angle bend in it, and you can see how that arrangement looks. And then the G key arm kind of comes straight out, and the pearl is pretty much straight on centered with the key arm. Now the same is true for the Series 3, which is also a type A body. We have that hard right bend here. We have the G key arm that comes out with the pearl straight in line with it. Got the little miniature bis key pearl. We have the B that has the pearl that's pretty much hanging off of the side of the pad cup there, but we now have the addition of the front F key, so that has now been added in. But aside from that, when you look at the two of these, I don't know if I'll be able to get this to focus on both of them, but you can kind of see there's a lot of similarities here. They're pretty much identical. If you just cover up that bis key, it pretty much has the same identical look for a Series 2. So there's your Series 3, there's your Series 2. Now, you know, every now and then you'll find a Series 2 that did have a front F either added or I believe it was an option you could get done at the factory if you wanted it. As we go here, I know this is a lot of information, but I'm trying to make as thorough and detailed of a walk through these keys as possible. So now, when we go to the Type B body, we have a different layout to the top stack. You can see that the G key kind of has a curve upward right here. This doesn't come straight out. That pearl has now been pulled up. The A key arm now has a soft, gradual bend instead of that hard right angle. And let's see what else here. the bis is larger. We have a much larger bis, and it's kind of convex. So we got a rather convex shape to the pearl on the bis, where the older ones were still concave and they were just really tiny. So we have a bigger bis key. The B is now mostly on top of the actual pad cup. And then, of course, we have the bis here. So, and you can see they're kind of much more in line. It's not as much of that hard V shape. They're actually, these keys are all brought a little closer to the actual fulcrum point. So they're not as long as these are, which I find makes it a little bit more comfortable, because now with those keys being shorter, if you come around and look at the horn this way, picture your hand wrapped around it. When those keys, the fulcrum is shorter, now brings your whole hand closer to the body of the horn, closer to the palm keys, and you have less travel in these keys as far as your fingers go. So it makes it a little bit more comfortable. And the same is true, of course, on this other Series 4 as well. So now, moving on to what other part can we do? We can do the octave mechanism. So the octave mechanism on these horns is pretty much the same. The older horns had a style that was a little bit more similar to like a Kahn New Wonder type of octave mechanism. It had multiple linkages to it, but around right when this horn was made, somewheres in mid to late 23, they switched over to this design here, and it has this little tiny block in here, and I don't know if you can see it, but it kind of has like a guide that slides on that, and it pivots. It relies on the neck, to the spring tension of the neck, to operate the octave mechanism. If you don't have the neck on it, it really doesn't have any spring to make it work, where the older ones will work whether you have the neck attached or not. Not that that matters, because to play the horn, you need the neck on it. But it is interesting if that. And I find this design to be much better. It's easier to work on, it's easier to regulate, and it's just more simplistic and a cleaner design. Same here. This is the Series 3, which is also the Type A body. And then here, Type B body, we still have the same mechanism. We have the same mechanism there. Now, of course, one difference, the earlier ones, you can see this one here, it has kind of a teardrop metal button that you push, your touch piece for your octave that you use for your thumb. Now, on the Series 3, we now have a pearl button. And, of course, the Series 4s also have the pearl button. Now, the pearl button, if it's lined up properly, it feels really nice. And being that it's pearl, it's not going to wear through. And, you know, if you got a silver horn, you're not going to see brass showing through over time or anything like that. It's kind of nice having that pearl button there. A lot of horn manufacturers had switched over to that idea more in the later 20s and in the 30s. So that's pretty nice. Let's see. One other thing before I'm going to flip these horns over and we're going to look at the other side. But before I get to that, there's a couple more things with the keywork. Now, one other thing with the octave mechanism. If it has this newer type octave mechanism, the E key will actually jump underneath of the upper stack rod that goes through here. It'll jump under that and come out there. So you can see that goes underneath. On the older style octave mechanisms, you'll see a straight key arm for your top E. That goes straight across, because this rod doesn't go this high up. The rod actually stops down here somewhere, and the mechanism connects down here for the older octave mechanisms. So that's another thing you can keep in mind. When looking at these horns, I would say, you know, the old ones, if you get one that's in really nice shape, they're okay, but you really would like to prefer to find one that is either just before this point, so like in the 22, 23 area, or, you know, this is a 23, but the later end of 23 when they made the octave mechanism improvements. And from there onward, you know, they only get better. So that is that. Now, the keys, if you look, wherever you have a key that jumps over, like a bar here, a bridge key, whatever you would like to call it, wherever you have that happen, same here, this is just flat. There's nothing on here. It's just a flat piece. Now, on the later keywork, even starting with the Series 3 here, we can see there's like a little hemisphere shape, this little nub that sticks out. And we have it on the Series 4s as well. That's something that you can kind of use as a judgment of how old the keywork design is. Now, like I said, Series 3s, it's still an older style body tube, but it kind of has up-to-date keywork. So you'll start seeing those little nubs on there on the Series 3s. But the older Series 2s, they are just flat. So now we will take a look at the other side of these horns. Okay, now we're looking at the opposite side of these saxophones. And we'll start over here. We can see that obviously the Series 2s do not have that extra guard that covers and prevents you from bumping the B key closed. The Series 3 has it, and of course the Series 4s have that as well. You can clearly see the different style chromatic F sharp on the type A versus the type B bodies here. Now there are also some differences if you look at the low C sharp. On the type A bodies, there's a little nipple soldered onto the actual bow joint right there. And the adjustment material just goes right on the back side of the key spine, and that's how they work. Same on the Series 3, which is also a type A body. The type B bodies no longer have that nipple. Instead, they have a little kind of a cork round little cup there that holds the adjustment material. For this one, it's cork. You put whatever you want in there, I guess. But that is how they changed for the type B bodies. So both Series 4s have that. And you can see that used on other Series 4 Bueschers, their altos, their tenors, so on. You'll see those differences. The forked E flat key, for the most part, stays the same on these. There might be slight differences. Honestly, with these horns, sometimes just year to year, or even in the same year, you can find some slight variances. So everything here isn't completely set in stone. You may find a horn that has a little bit of this and a little bit of that. That's not entirely uncommon to find with these. They kind of did gradually change, but what I'm showing is some of the major breaks between a series and another. These earlier ones, they clearly have similarities to each other, and the later ones have their own similarities. So another thing we can look at now is the palm keys. The earlier type A bodies, you will see the palm keys where the F key kind of jumps over this post, and then it has a clearance bend put into it to go around the palm E flat pad cup. So you've got the pad cup there for palm E flat, and then palm F bends around it. You'll see the same thing on the Series 3, which is also a type A body horn. And then on the Series 4s, we now have the type B body. We've got these nice straight key arms, kind of similar to how the cons were done. And there's no more bends in those. You can see it here as well. Now, also take notice that the palm E flat, this one has kind of like a hollowed out spoon. If I can get it to focus right here, it's got this short little round hollowed out spoon shape for the touch piece, and that's how the A type body horns were. The Series 2s and Series 3s, you will find that. On the Series 4s, they refined them, and they made it have this nice teardrop shape to it. So you can see there it is different as well as on this horn. And last, the Palm D, same thing. This one is a little bit more of a flatter design. You'll see that on the earlier ones, and then sometime around 1924 or so, they started to make them a little bit taller. This is a 25, this Series 3, and it's a little bit taller standing, but it still has the conventional style the way that they were on the older horns. But when you go to the newer ones, you can see that if you look close at these key feet, the way the key is molded, it kind of has this backward pointing key foot. So the foot on the key points toward the back here and here on the F. So they did do some refinements to the palm keys on the Series 4s with the B body type. Now, you know, once again, this is another point that can be confusing sometimes. The pinky spatulas. This is a Series 2 pinky spatula. This is a Series 3, and this is a Series 4. Well, what's the difference? There really isn't much of a difference. One thing I have noticed, the Series 3s have more of a gap between here than the Series 4s do. I think that was just because they were in transition going from the older body tubes to the newer, and these keys were probably a mix of some that were made for the older horns and some that were made for the newer, and trying to get them all aligned, you know, they didn't do the best job in the world here on the Series 3. Now, that being said, the B key on the older horns, if you can see it, there's no clearance for a roller because there's no roller. But if you look at the later ones here, on this key, there's actually a little bit of a clearance cutout on the B touch piece where the B flat roller fits over top of it. You might be able to see, well, I could just show from this side. Right in here, you can see that little rounded cutout, and that's for that roller to fit there and have plenty of clearance. So that's more of a keywork design change and not as much having to do with the bodies. But the Series 3 will have the 4 roller, the Series 2 will have the 2 roller with the Pearl G sharp, and the Series 4s will obviously have the 4 roller cluster. Let's see, what else is there? The thumb rest, that's another thing. The older thumb rest is smaller and it has a tighter radius to it. It also has more of a, it's kind of more curved around along the length of it, if that makes any sense. You can see it here, this is the same way. Now, the Series 4s, it's probably hard to tell in pictures or on video like this, but the Series 4s are a longer, larger radius, and they're more flat. So they're a little wider and flatter, and to me it's more comfortable than the older design that they used. So the Series 4s with the B body design have a slightly superior thumb rest. Trying to think what else we've got here. That's pretty much the bulk of the changes. You know, there might be a few little tiny things here and there. Oh yeah, one other thing I just remembered. The spring hooks that are used on the keys. I'm trying to see if I have a good, I might have to, oh, I can show you right here. So this is the older design. It's a rather flat piece. It's just a little flat piece soldered onto the key, and it has kind of a little cutout on both ends of it. You can actually spring a key either way you want to with this design. And that's how the older ones were. Now the Series 3 onward and the Series 4s have this little bit more refined look to their spring hooks. You can see it's kind of more of a round cylinder with like a little, kind of like a panhead screw shape on the top of it, and I just think they're a little bit more elegant and refined, and probably a little stronger. They don't have a tendency to break off as easily as something like this would, and you can see that on all of these other horns. So overall, now one other thing, engravings can be a little bit difficult sometimes to to talk about engravings, because the issue is, like with this horn, this engraving is more of a probably closer to 1928 style engraving, 28 or maybe very, very early 29. Um, but this horn is a 1925 by the serial number. That's when the body tube would have been made. Um, so there's a good chance that this might have been some remaining stock and it didn't actually get finished and leave the factory until 28 or 29. Um, that's just how it is. So even though this is a Series 3, it does have USA on it. A lot of times you'll see it's kind of like common knowledge that a Series 3 won't say USA and a Series 4 will say USA. Well, not always the case, especially with these C melodies. There's kind of, when you get around between 24 and 26, there's a lot of different variances that happen on these. So that will commonly be some area for confusion, but you can't give that too much thought because there can be older horns with later engravings and so on. The older Series 2s usually have this kind of shape to, it's kind of, I call it the banner design because it kind of looks like a banner going around. And you can just see it says Elkhart, Indiana, and that's it. And that's how the older ones will. Now this has a little bit more elaborate engraving because it's a gold-plated horn. This one, that's kind of like the standard Series 4 engraving for like a maybe 1928 or so. Now, standard 27, this is definitely a standard 1927 engraving. You can see it does say Elkhart, Indiana, USA on a third line. Okay, so that is a difference there. That's pretty standard up until somewheres in 1929, where they switched it over a little bit more and they went to more of this style, where it still has that, I call it the shield shape, which, the general shape of this outline here, it looks like a shield. And for this horn, they've done Elkhart, Indiana, or IND, is on one line, and then USA is underneath of it. So we've got two lines instead of the older ones, which had three lines. So that was another change that had happened in 1929. Now, obviously, the further older or later in the 20s you go, the more rare it is to find a C melody. You'll see a lot of them in the 1922, 23, and 24 range. They start to slow down a little bit, 25, the 25, 26 area. And then 27, it's weird. It's like they kind of thin out the older stock in 25 and 26. You kind of see them dwindle down, and then it's like, bam, they released the Series 4. Whether it's late 26, early 27, you'll see the Series 4s come out, and that's with the newer style body tube. And these are considered to be the best playing and most desirable of the Buescher True Tone C melodies, the Series 4s. And the later you go, obviously, the more rare they are to find. So if you are fortunate enough to find one, snatch it up and get it fixed up and enjoy it, because they're wonderful horns. They play amazingly well, and they're just cool because you don't see very many of them. If this was an alto or a tenor, you see tons of those that are Series 4s. But being that this is a C melody, it is quite rare to find a later model like this. And especially this one is a 1929. By the time you get to this point, C melody production has pretty much crawled to a halt. Anything, I have seen some 1930, 31, maybe even a little bit later than that. There's been a couple out there that have an aristocrat engraving on the bell, but those are exceedingly rare. You really don't see those come up hardly ever. But anyway, I hope that this helps somebody out there. It's just been a very in-depth discussion of the design changes made to the Buescher True Tone C Melody saxophone. So thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and have a wonderful day.